Awesome, thank you. Presenting virtually presents a whole set of new challenges beyond those that we meet when we're presenting from the stage in person. And I'm sure in the last 6 or so months of this wonderful world of COVID, many of you have met some of those challenges face on. I know I certainly have. In this presentation, I am going to share with you some tips that will elevate your virtual and video presentations. I am going to focus today on additional tips when you're working in the video world. So this is not stuff that particularly applies to a stage presentation. This is assuming that we've already got that stage presenting reasonably organized, and this is additional stuff that we need on top of that when working in this wonderful virtual world. Hello, welcome. I'm Jill Walker, and as well as being an active part of the Dynamics 365 community, both here in Australia and through the community group, I am one of the presenters at Summit next week. I'm also a professional member of Professional Speakers Australia and the Vice President of the New South Wales chapter. My intention this morning is to share with you some hints and tips that will help you in your virtual presentation. But before we go into that, and now, Robin, the clicker has kicked out again.
One moment, please, while we handle this technical issue. Folks who've just joined us, we are solving a technical issue right at this moment to get the slides moving. And again, just to let everyone know, here we go, getting the slides moving. Okay, that looks good. Second slide of question marks. Oops. Jill, we're not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. What I want to look at first of all is why do people invest time and money to go to a traditional in-person conference? And I'd like you to jot your ideas down in the chat, and we'll give you just a minute or so to think about that. And then I will come back and we'll look at your ideas, and I will then move forward with my ideas. So we'll give you about a minute to think of your ideas as to why people invest the time, and typically it is reasonably significant time. Usually when we allow for travel, it is at best a full day, and it can of course be as much as a full week, and also the money to go to a traditional in-person conference. So your ideas about why people invest somewhere between a day and a week of their life, and often several $1,000s to go to an in-person conference, which of course is what we are trying to replicate in this virtual world. And Robin, once we've got some ideas, can you share them back with me, as
Yes.
I'm not seeing that, please?
Now that I've unmuted myself, I can share them. We had the answer of networking, and also relaxed, informal discussions with peers, emotional connection with speakers and peers, parenthesis, emotion creates behavioral change.
Someone's looking for my job by the looks of it.
And those are the only responses I'm seeing. Go ahead.
Right. So interestingly, the ideas that you people have come up with are not touching on knowledge. And that is very interesting. When I look at the top half dozen reasons of why people go to a conference, we've got to gain knowledge or inspiration, insights as to how other companies, other people, other organizations might solve a problem that you're facing. Networking, improved skills, and fun were the top reasons that my research gave me. Now, knowledge, definitely, less so inspiration and insights. They certainly can be met by video and online presentations. But in spite of that, the traditional conference has survived in parallel with the rise of YouTube and TEDx webinars and all of the rest. It is only in this last 6 or so months, when we've been beset with COVID, that we have seen the in-person conferences dying away. So there is obviously something that an in-person conference is giving to its participants that the virtual conference struggles. And that's even within that whole knowledge and inspiration. When we look at the other items that the research showed, and these were more the ones that you people touched on, we've got networking, and that sort of includes those ad hoc conversations, meetings with people that maybe you weren't expecting to meet at the conference, but nevertheless spark a good idea. Skill building, which is really quite difficult to do in a virtual environment, because for the leader of the session to see what is happening, to see where a participant is struggling, and therefore to give them those little nudges about, if you tried this, or maybe if you did it that way, which is very easy in an in-person environment, is much, much harder in a virtual environment. And the last one is fun. And I can certainly say, hand on heart, that sitting in my spare room, listening to somebody is nowhere near as much fun as being in a room, meeting people, and all of the other things that we've already discussed. So the virtual world certainly has a lot to live up to. And in order to live up to that, it presents a lot of challenges. So I'd now like to put it back to you people, and what are the challenges that you face when taking a talk or a presentation, a conference piece, whatever it might be? I'd like you to imagine that you've got that piece that you've delivered successfully in an in-person environment, an in-person conference or user group, whatever it might be. And now you are taking that same presentation into this virtual world. What are the challenges that you are now facing with that previously successful presentation? And again, if you can pop your answers in the chat, we'll give you a minute or so to think about it, to put some answers into the chat, and then Robin will help me and we'll look at what you've come up with.
We did have one.
Can you let me...
We had one extra response to the previous question, which sort of along the same lines as networking, but it was meeting people interested in the same topics as you. So that was for the previous.
Yes, that is
now we're
sort of networking, meeting people. I mean, as always, when we don't make these things multi-choice, we're going to get options, the very similar things, but phrased differently. But yes, that is certainly a very valid reason for going to an in-person conference, and it is something that you will struggle to achieve in this virtual world.
Okay, we have a few answers. People talking at the same time, not as easy to learn and question the presenters since it's in chat boxes, and then also can't see audience reactions.
Awesome, thank you. The three that I had, which do really encompass that, are distractions, disengagement, and technology. And although technology is the third one, I will allude to the problem that we had a moment ago when various devices on which this presentation depends decided to go on holiday. So, distractions. What we have got is lots and lots of ways that people can do other stuff. So when you're attending a virtual conference, it is very, very easy to just quickly check your phone. Has an important email come in? If it has, of course, the temptation to deal with it there and then is extremely large. As well as that, we even have the temptation of jobs around the house. While we're working from home, it is very easy to think, oh, I'll just go and put a load of washing in. I'll just go and check up on the kids, make sure they're doing their work. I'll just go and do this. I'll maybe even nip out and do some shopping. In short, that remote control that enables us to go anywhere other than the conference that we're at is on high alert. We have got lots and lots of ways that we can be distracted from that conference, and we can take our brain and put it from on mode into off mode, at least as far as that conference is concerned. And instead of the conference, focus on other things. So what is the solution? What can you do as a virtual presenter to overcome that? There are three things that you can use to overcome that. The first is the pace of your presentation. So my recommendation is to keep all of your slides relatively short, to move through them fairly quickly. Make sure also that you have a reasonable number of slides so that you are giving your audience a lot of value. It is also very worthwhile to keep the whole presentation as interactive as possible. So in the same way that you would from stage, throw out questions, ask the audience what they think about something that you've just said, and take on board their answers. So keep it as interactive as possible. And there are various ways that you can do that. I've already done 2 examples of where we go out to the chat box and you give me your thoughts or opinions about something. Many of the webinar technologies also allow us to do surveys. So you can have some sort of multiple choice or even free text question. You can then collate those answers and you can speak to the audience summary. We also need to make sure that we are doing everything we can so that people are actively involved, and that obviously reduces the temptation for them to go and do something super scintillating like sorting the washing. Problem number 2 is disengagement. And when people present virtually, it can be very easy to feel that your presenter is doing this. They are looking down or looking at their screen or looking anywhere other than at you. And of course, you are the most important member of any audience that you are in. When you do that, you really are sending a message that as the presenter, you are just doing your stuff and you're doing it by rote, almost like reciting a nursery rhyme or something of that ilk, and you are not interested in your audience. So what we need to do is to maintain that visibility and interaction. We need to use gestures and keep eye contact with the audience. And I'll admit, with the setup that I've got here at the moment, with my clicker having decided to go on holiday, that is proving challenging. But there's a few things that we can do to ensure that, and they are covered here. So we have got posture, position, and eye line. Whenever I am presenting virtually, I really always like to be standing, and I position things so that the camera is seeing not just my head, but a reasonable amount of my torso as well. And of course, if I were on a stage and you were sitting directly in front of me, that is exactly what you would see. I would be standing there, possibly sitting on a high stool that is used in some presentations, but the vast majority of speakers do stand, and as well as standing, they make sure that they do not have a lectern or a desk in front of them. So there is clear space between them and the audience. When you position yourself, ideally also you want to be standing back from the camera. That allows you to gesture, and you're not forced to keep your hands close together, almost as though you're saying prayers, because as soon as you move them this far apart, they've gone out of the camera angle. So you can see I can move my arms with my current setup. I can move my arms fairly wide apart, and you can still see both of my hands. Now, yes, admittedly, if I was on a big stage, I could do this, and I'm not able to do that, but I can get a lot closer than if I was right up on top of the camera. We also need to think about our position relative to the camera of our head, and specifically our eyes. We want to set things up so that we are looking just a little bit up at the camera. And while we're doing that, on the screen that the audience is seeing, we want our eyes to be roughly at the 1/3 mark. So if you imagine your screen, and imagine on that screen drawing a noughts and crosses board. So we've got 2 vertical lines, 2 horizontal lines, splitting the screen into 9. If you take that imaginary noughts and crosses board, you want your eyes to be roughly at that top 1/3 mark. That feels about right from the audience perspective. You certainly don't want to be sitting right down low so that your head is just at the top of the screen like so, and you certainly don't want to be, and I can't do this, I'm not going to start climbing on tables, but you also don't want the top of your head to be disappearing off the top of the camera. So it's worth investing a little bit of time so that you've got the room to behave as you would if you're on a stage. So just to reiterate, we want to stand as this lady is and give ourselves room so that we can gesture, and also so that we can move. Because I am standing, I can step to this side of the screen or step to that side of the screen. Although cable length does limit that somewhat. Now, this is a challenge that I fell foul of. And when you buy a laptop, you may well not think of the position of the webcam. But this particular webcam has its camera right down, or this particular laptop, sorry, has its webcam right down at the very bottom of the screen. And that makes it extremely difficult to manage this eyeline presentation using that webcam and the various things that I've mentioned earlier in terms of how to get that presentation stance that is as close as possible to an in-person conference stance that you would use. If you're unfortunate enough to have a laptop like this, or you are taller than a number of people, it is a good idea to take the laptop and lift it up, put it on a pile of books or put something else onto the table so that you are achieving that eyeline height of the camera. So I'm now going to move on and look at the technology challenges. But before I go there, what are your thoughts about what you need to do in order to make a webinar as close to an in-person conference experience? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you can put something into the chat, that would be awesome. And again, Robin, if you can let me know once we've got stuff into the chat, please.
Okay. And I think I want to wait a little bit longer the next time because we had one more come in to the previous question.
Sure.
Sort of on the same theme as not being able to see the audience reaction, but when presenting material, how can you validate that people are learning what you're delivering? So that
that's actually, we will actually, and please remind me, I think we should address that question because it is, of course, very important. And we know that one of the big reasons that people go to conferences is to learn new skills. So we'll give you a minute or so to put your thoughts on the challenges into the chat box, and then we'll come back and look at the validation of learning.
I haven't seen anything entered as yet. Do you want to refresh us on what the question is?
Sure. What we're thinking about at the moment is the challenges that you face with the whole virtual environment versus going to an in-person conference. And maybe if we move on and look at the validation that people are learning. So there's a few things that you can do, but it is certainly not as effective as the in-person conference. And I think that is one of the reasons why the in-person conferences have survived in spite of the cost and the time, given that the video technology has been available for a number of years. We can certainly do things like asking people to respond in chat. We can do, and then there are various forms of polls and surveys, and they can be structured anything from just some fun questions type survey right the way through to a full-blown test. If what you need to do is to get a lump of information over to your audience, and you really do need to be sure that that audience has taken that on board, the survey technology can be used to generate what is, to all intents and purposes, a test. Now, there may well be challenges in the virtual environment and the whole switch off to get people to do that test, and that probably will come into how you position your session up front, but the technology is there. Another technique that we have, or another tool that we have at our disposal, is breakout rooms. So if you've got an audience of, let's say 30, let's keep the numbers nice and simple, splitting that down into 6 breakout rooms with 5 people in each breakout room, and maybe if you've got enough panelists or leaders on the session, so you can make sure that you've got one of your leaders into each of those breakout rooms. And then of course you can talk through in more detail, and you can address questions specifically in the breakout room. And by definition, because the numbers are always going to be smaller in breakout rooms, you've also got the ability to assess who has taken on board the content and who is struggling. It's also possible to structure your session so that you can then bring the breakout rooms back into the main room, and you can get some feedback. And based on what happened in the breakout rooms, you can say something along the lines of, I see that some of you are struggling with topic whatever, and then go through that topic again slightly differently, and that of course will increase the retention of whatever that topic is. That of course does require a lot of upfront planning so that you've got enough of the leaders and people who can do that feedback. You also need somebody to run the breakout rooms for you. So does that answer that question? Have we had any comments to that, Robin? Okay, I will move on now, and we will start to look at the technology aspects. And we have already touched on technology, but in this segment, I want to make some further comments. So again, over to you people. How does the technology of online meetings limit you compared to in person? So ideas, and put your thoughts into the chat, please.
We did have a comment about the idea. I like the idea of breakout rooms. Would definitely like to know more about this topic.
Okay, I will cover that within this technology section, although it does vary on whatever webinar platform you are using. And Robin, if the person who asked that question is presenting at Summit next week, maybe we should get someone to make sure that how it's done in Bizzabo is explained to people.
Yes, I think that since I've seen various platforms, obviously GoToWebinar does not have a breakout facility, at least not our implementation of it, but I have seen other platforms that do that sort of breakout. There's one platform that simulates a room with tables. I think that technology is quite new, and it maybe even in its infancy, but because of COVID, we're seeing creative solutions to that problem.
Yes.
But I think it is being realized as a solution to that learning issue that was described.
Now, sorry,
okay.
Carry on, Robin.
Do you want me to go ahead and we have another comment in the chat?
Yes, please.
This comment is, I am limited as to what kind of online meeting platforms to use.
Yes, you certainly are limited. And as Robin said, there are new technologies are appearing. With all of these platforms, it's worth being aware that they have different license levels, and a number of them have what's called the freemium license model. So what the freemium software license model gives you is an amount of functionality that you get for free. And then you get at least one, and it could be as many as half a dozen additional layers above that that are not free. They cost increasing amounts of money, but for that increasing amount of money, you get more features. Breakout rooms are quite often one of the features that don't exist in that free version of the platform, but do exist further up. Another point around breakout rooms and other things within technology, and more widely for that matter, is the terminology. So breakout rooms is a term that is commonly used, but be aware that if you're using a different platform and you can't see the term breakout rooms, the functionality might exist, but it might be given a further name. So does that answer that aspect? Now, what a breakout room is a way of taking your conference or webinar participants, dividing them down into smaller groups. So in the example I used earlier, we took our 30 participants and split them into 5 groups of 6. And then the person who is controlling that within the webinar technology presses a button, and instead of everybody hearing the presenter, they get put into subgroups and they're unmuted, so those few people can talk amongst themselves about a question or a problem or whatever. And as I said, optionally, you can put a seminar leader into each room. So the person who asked about breakout rooms, does that answer your question, or have you got further questions?
Yes, we heard that answered your question. We had another suggestion as to a challenge of technology, and that is breakdown, when technology breaks down.
That never happens, does it? We never have technology failures. And obviously I am being sarcastic. It is almost something that you need to be prepared for. So you need to have a plan B. And it really depends at what level the failure occurs. So I'll run through a few common examples. The one that's bitten me today is, even though it was working at about 10 to 9 this morning, my clicker has decided not to work. So my plan B for that situation is I'm having to just step sideways and use the keyboard. That one is not too bad. There's a whole range of failures that you can anticipate. One that can beset you even on the conference platform is, of course, somewhere in the whole spectrum of technology, you can't use your slides. So you've built a presentation, you've got however many slides, and your plan was to work through those slides. And then something happens where the slides don't work. The plan B that you need to have for that always is that you can present without your slides. And my recommendation would be, for webinars and for in-person conferences, always take a printout of your slides with any notes. And that way, if that bit fails, you are able to at least use your notes and just give the presentation. In an ideal world, of course, you'll be able to speak to the topic even without those notes. But I would recommend having the notes, even if they are just a security blanket for you, so that you can then go through and work and at least give some aspect of your presentation. Obviously, if we have a major failure, such as the internet goes out or there's an outage on whichever platform you are using, the simple answer is you cannot have a plan B for that. And the best you can do is reschedule your presentation for some time later. So, Robin, is that answering the question of technology failures, or is there something people would like me to go into a little bit further with that one?
I think that answered it. I don't see any other comments.
Okay. Other things to be aware of with technology, and specifically in this world of COVID. The biggest thing, I think, is we are having to make do with what we have at home. So right now, I am in our spare room. I've got a table balanced on the bed. I've got my webcam clipped to the wardrobe and various other things to make do and mend within a home environment. Whereas if we were at an in-person conference, it is quite likely that all we need to do is show up an hour or so before we are due to speak with our slides on a memory stick, and pretty much everything else is done for us. So prior to our session, we're given a microphone, whichever microphone style that is. The projector is there, and of course it may well be a super duper whiz bang projected around multiple screens all around the room, or if it's a much smaller user group local affair, it may just be a single image. But it is very normal that when you go as a speaker to a conference, there is very little technology that you need to worry about. Whereas now we're all managing ourselves. And I know I'm not the only person doing interesting balancing acts in the spare room. Couple of things that I would comment on that in terms of DIY. First of all, I use a detachable separate webcam rather than my computer webcam. And the reason is quite simple. It gives me a lot more flexibility. So I am now able to stand probably about 2 meters back from the webcam, and that has achieved the position that I mentioned earlier. However, I am not using the webcam microphone. My microphone is this lapel mic here, clipped on to obviously my lapel. So I've turned off the webcam microphone and I'm using this microphone instead. And I'm doing that because if I were this far away from the webcam, this is great for the visual, but it's really poor from an audio perspective. Webcam microphones are actually designed to be used quite close up, and it's therefore not possible to use the video and the microphone at the same time and achieve this distant view that I've got today. So what I've done is I have got a separate USB microphone, and it didn't cost very much, and I was able to buy it very quickly. So none of the stuff I'm using today is expensive or difficult to get hold of. But it's certainly worth thinking about if that is what you're doing. Something else that I would definitely recommend, and that is to always use a clicker. Now, I'm not using a clicker because that is the technology fail that I had to deal with, but normally I would be using a clicker. Another trick that I have learned is to use a dual monitor. And I do that so that in PowerPoint I can go in presentation mode, and on one screen I've got the full slide, and that's the one that I've shared with you people and what you're seeing. But then balanced on the bed, I have got the presenter view, which gives me the current slide, the next slide, and any notes that I've made all visible together. And of course, that has been positioned so that I can see it while using the webcam. So there's quite a few things that you can do that will bring your presentation, even if you are doing it at your dining room table or in your spare room, that brings it closer to that conference experience where you're at the front of the room, perhaps on a stage, and the audience are in the same room in front of you and with you. So for the last 10 minutes that we've got, I'm going to open this up to conversation. And Robin, are we able to unmute everybody so we can just have open questions, or do we need to go back to the chat box?
We can actually unmute people if you have a microphone. So there's a hand raising feature. If you'd like to say something, I can see if your hand is raised. Go ahead and indicate that, and I will unmute you. There isn't
Awesome.
there isn't an unmute all option.
Right.
It says one by one.
Actually, that's something that some of the platforms have and some don't. The ability for the conference leader to unmute or mute everybody on block. And obviously, if you've got people up to the hundreds at a session, you wouldn't want to be doing this one by one that Robin's got to do at the moment.
Right. So I guess I have a question. I'm not seeing anybody's hand raised, but do either raise your hand or type a question and we can unmute you. I was wondering if you when you open the floor to questions and you're presenting on video, which I think is very effective. This has been one of the first webinars that we've done that with GoToWebinar. We don't always get a good connection for the video, but it's worked out well. And I'm just wondering, when you open the floor to questions, you would necessarily not be maintaining eye contact, right? You would have to look at your screen.
Yes,
Or
and
is that an issue?
mm, I think a point that we could put in under the DIY is, again, at a conference, you will normally have a room host or an MC or somebody fulfilling that role, and they can do a certain amount of the organizing. It is certainly well worth doing what Robin has been doing extremely well for us today, and have a second person who can watch chat boxes, watch for hands being raised. Trying to do everything yourself without any support is extremely difficult. And I would possibly go as far to say it is probably almost impossible to use breakout rooms unless you have got somebody who, during the early part of your session, can divvy people up into those rooms and then can hit the button that sends people into the specific breakout rooms and send a message that says, 1 minute left or whatever, and then pull people back. The thought of trying to do that as well as being the main presenter, I have to admit, gives me the heebie-jeebies.
I
So
do think,
Robin, thank you.
yes, having a co-presenter, or I've we're calling them moderators on our virtual sessions, and I've moderated a few sessions with multiple presenters and Q&A where we were fielding questions in a chat box and unmuting people, and you have to pay attention to the technology, so it's a really good plan if you have multiple people that can do different things and field the questions. So
No, I don't know what it did then, but okay.
there was a webcam came online, I think.
Yes,
And
okay.
I am not seeing any questions in the question box or anything in the chat box.
Okay.
If anyone has
Well,
anything, do please enter.
if people don't have any further questions, I'm quite prepared to give everyone a little bit of an early mark. And therefore, just to wrap up, I'm sure many of you will know me, but there are some contact details. And if you've got any further questions, whether they're about Summit or about other virtual conferences that you may be giving in this wonderful world of COVID, I am more than happy to support you and help you. And I will now hand this back to Robin to send us on our way on behalf of Dynamics 365 user group.
Great. Thanks very much, Jill. And thanks everyone for attending. Thank you, Jill, for your presentation. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.